We now turn to the newly re-landscaped 6th Congressional District. The 6th flanks the eastern edge of the metro area, including Aurora and Brighton, but its southern boundary extends as far west as Littleton and Highlands Ranch. Republican Mike Coffman is the incumbent in the 6th, and Democratic State Representative Joe McCloskey is the challenger. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here. And my colleague Curtis Lee from the Denver Post is joining me on the moderator's table, and you have the first question, Curtis.
Thank you, Brandon. Mr. McCloskey, we'll start with you first. It's been 3 months since the mass shooting at the Century Aurora 16 Theater. Aurora is now the heart of the district, and many victims and families of that shooting have called for politicians to get tough on assault weapons. Do you support reinstating the federal assault weapon ban that expired in Congress in 2004?
I'll never forget going to the vigil and talking to a young woman whose boyfriend sacrificed himself so that she could live. And I'll never forget hugging her, feeling like I owe her something. I strongly believe in the Second Amendment for reasons like hunting and personal protection. My own mother owns a Glock or a handgun. But we have to do some important measures. I do support reinstating the Clinton-era semi-automatic weapon ban. And why do we need 100-round clips? It's like allowing a tank to drive down Colfax Avenue. And also, why do we need online ammunition sales? I will get tough on those issues and still respect the Second Amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Coffman. Same question.
Well, I agree with Governor Hickenlooper in that, when he said that there was nothing that could have prevented this. But I do believe that we ought, after this is over with, and I don't support a reinstatement of the assault weapons ban, but I do believe that we have a responsibility to make sure that firearms are kept out of the hands of criminals and of those who are mentally unstable. And I think that after this incident's over with, we're going to have to review what happened when all the facts come out and determine what we can do to do a better job.
All right. This next question will start with you, Congressman Coffman. Your campaign ran 2 ads which both raised the specter of child predators and abductions around the same time this community was watching the tragic case of Jessica Ridgway unfold. And that struck a nerve with some people out there. What was the thinking behind airing those ads in that time period?
Well, the first ad certainly came before the horrible incident occurred, but it does speak to judgment. Jessica's law is of some version is now in 43 states, and what it provides for minimum mandatory sentences for child predators. We know that the rate of recidivism is incredibly high, that they reoffend, and so I think this is important. And then Katie's law speaks to requiring DNA samples on convicted felons, and it's helped us crack cold cases, and it will help us, I think, solve future crimes. And so Mr. McCloskey voted against both of these proposals, and I think it does speak to an issue about judgment.
Right. Mr. McCloskey, one of those ads pointed out that you voted no in the 2009 Katie's law that came up at the state legislature, and that would have required DNA samples to be taken from people when they were arrested, not convicted of certain crimes. And I'd like it if you could explain your vote on that. And since you brought up Jessica's law, you can explain both if you'd like.
Mike, both ads are despicable, and you know it. The Colorado Fraternal Order of Police endorsed me for my strong public safety track record and my strong support of lifetime sentencing. They called his ads grossly inaccurate, false, and despicable. There's a reason they endorsed me, because of my strong public safety track record. Who are you going to believe in this debate, his political handlers or Colorado cops?
Well, can you explain your vote, though?
I'd be glad to. Here's the height of hypocrisy. He voted against a similar bill in Congress. I voted against Katie's law bill, particularly because it's been overturned in 4 other jurisdictions, and I do not want criminals to go free on a legal technicality. I was working on a stronger bill, and he knows that too.
You can have a quick rebuttal.
Well, first of all, certainly lifetime sentences are not existing law, first of all. And secondly, the bill before us in Congress was concerning grants, but Colorado in the year prior had already instituted the program based on a fee structure that I believe is a model for the country, that has a surcharge on all civil penalties and crimes. And so I think that that's the way to go, Colorado, and that's the bill you voted against.
The bill I voted for was tougher than Jessica's law. It passed 65-0, and with my Republican colleagues, we killed a poison pill amendment to make a tough bill stronger, to make sure that sexual predators could not not use the internet to lure children. It's why the Colorado cop supported this bill, and it's why he's wrong.
All right, I got to move us on here. It's been a fiery race so far, and I'd like to give you each the opportunity to chime in here. What are one or two of the biggest mischaracterizations that the other side's made against you, and would you tell voters about them? And I'll start with you, Mr. McCloskey.
About the mischaracterizations?
Yeah, one or two from the other side.
Well, number one, we just covered it. Complete mischaracterization, complete lie, and it's a falsehood, and it's one of the reasons he took down one of those ads.
Congressman?
Well, that's not true. The ad's correct, and the ad ran its full course of a week to its schedule when it was replaced by another ad. I think that in terms of mischaracterization, would be that I'm not willing to compromise, would be that I'm focused on social issues. I've been focused on jobs in the economy, on small business, and on defense issues. And I've broken with my party when it comes to defense spending, because I believe, as somebody who served in the Army and the Marine Corps, a combat veteran, that we can responsibly cut defense spending without compromising our national security. In fact, I did a bill, an amendment with Congressman Jared Polis from the 2nd Congressional District that passed the floor of the House and brought down troop levels, and will bring down troop levels in Europe. And so I think working across party lines and not focused on social issues.
Mike is focused on social issues. He voted to defund Planned Parenthood. He supported twice the Personhood Amendment that would criminalize many forms of birth control and even outlaw abortion for victims of rape and incest. And he co-sponsored a bill with Congressman Aiken of Missouri to redefine rape. That may not be radical in his viewpoint, but for most voters in Colorado, that is.
We're actually staying on this topic. I'm going to let Curtis kind of inject in here.
On the Aiken bill, Congressman Kaufman, you've said that you've never focused on social issues. You mentioned that in this campaign. But before your district was redrawn last year, you co-sponsored H.R. 3, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortions Act. In that bill, it would have exempted only, quote, forcible rape, not simply rape in broader terms. Why was such a strict definition on rape in the original version of that bill?
Well, that amendment was taken out, and I supported that amendment to strip that language out. So the version that I voted for in the floor did not have that amendment in there. That was taken out in the Judiciary Committee as it should have been. You know, again, my focus on issues, and that dealt with public funding for abortion. Again, my focus on issues has been on jobs in the economy, has been on small business, and has been on defense issues.
But can you explain that initial version of the bill? What was that forcible rape? What did that mean? You know what?
That was an error on my part. And when we discovered that was in there, I supported that amendment to take that language out.
Staying, Mr. McCloskey, back to you. In 2009, you proposed a 6% fee on each plastic bag that would be used in major stores. You were the sponsor of that bill. Your opponents identified more than a dozen fee increases, which some consider tax increases, that you supported at the state capitol. What would you say to people who are worried that you'll go to Washington and just raise taxes?
That's not true. Here in Colorado, unlike my friends in D.C., we actually have to balance a budget. I cut my take-home pay 2%. As a member of the Audit Committee, I found over $71 million as a teammate of wasteful spending, so we didn't have to cut it from the budget. And I also helped cut over $5 billion from the last 5 fiscal years, the deepest cuts in Colorado's 136-year state history. I have a track record of Colorado common sense budget cuts, and I'm going to bring that to Washington. I also support what I call the Mark Udall version of the balanced budget, so we can address our $16 trillion debt and make sure we still protect Social Security.
Mr. Kaufman, can you explain some of those tax increases that,
sure.
that you talked
First
about?
of all, the 2% cut is a fiction because it didn't go back to taxpayers. It went to pay for benefits, and it was for all public employees. It wasn't just for the state legislature. Then the other thing is this idea about raising fees is not like raising taxes. Unfortunately, I can tell you as a former state treasurer for the state of Colorado that fees are often a backdoor increases because what they do is they sweep those accounts and put it into the general fund. And so I would disagree with on both those counts. I've fought for a balanced budget. I'm chairman of the Bipartisan Balanced Budget Caucus in the House. I fought to end congressional pensions. And I think that I've demonstrated my ability, certainly as a fiscal conservative. I have a track record to that effect.
Let's talk about his record. He makes $174,500 a year. He gets $55,000 from Colorado taxpayers for his pension. We pay $650 a month for a car to drive around when he doesn't use it half the time. And he raised his own pay when he was a state legislator. He needs to walk the walk. He talks about pension and other congressional reforms. He doesn't walk the walk.
Well, that's simply not accurate.
It is accurate,
that's not accurate. And the fact is that that I move forward with on 20% of the budget is defense spending, and I've been a strong leader, and that's why I earned the endorsement of the Denver Post for cutting the defense budget. For the Department of Defense is far too top-heavy. We've got overseas bases that we don't need anymore, and we've got to get out of the nation-building business. And to have that kind of credibility as a combat veteran, to bring that experience in Washington, D.C. When my opponent was asked about cutting the defense budget, he said he would defer to the military, to military leaders. I think that's fine for somebody that's never served their country, but he doesn't have the credibility to stand up to the Pentagon and to understand what can be cut without compromising our national security.
Here's another example where Mike and I disagree. He supported the radical sequestration or a fiscal cliff with across-the-board tax cuts. So he's basically taken our generals and our admirals out of the equation for strategic or thoughtful investments or cuts to the defense budget. I was talking to people who work for defense contractors in Helen's Ranch or Littleton, places like Lockheed Martin. They may lose their job because he's not doing his job. Another example where Tea Party ideology is trumping pragmatism, and he's got to go.
I'd like to actually ask, since you brought up the fiscal cliff, Democrats are locked in wanting to have the Bush tax cuts expire for people only making over $250,000 a year. Republicans want them for everybody. Would either of you be willing to come off of your party's sticking point on that and get to something in the middle in order to get something done about the fiscal cliff?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the fact is that what the Bush-era tax cuts will be expiring at the end of the year. It will take an affirmative act of Congress to move any of them forward. Would I love to see all of them move forward? Yes. That's not the political reality. And so I will support a compromise that puts revenue on the table, and I obviously expect my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to put entitlements on the table. And so I believe that there is an opportunity for a grand bargain in the lame duck session.
I want to protect the middle class and have a conversation about what that number is in terms of whether the Bush tax cuts expire for the most affluent. But let's remember, Social Security and Medicare did not get us in this fiscal mess. And could you imagine if we would have listened to George Bush and some of his Republican colleagues about privatizing Social Security, where we'd be today? It's not a Ponzi scheme like my opponent has called it. It's a way to make sure millions of Americans retire with dignity. We can have responsible budget reform, and we can do it in a responsible, thoughtful way, but we need pragmatists, not ideologues in Congress to do it.
Hold on. On taxes, will you come off the Democrats' position about $250,000?
I'd be open to that conversation. Yes, very much. And another example where I disagree with my party is, for example, Keystone Pipeline. If we can address environmental concerns, that could be a job producer. Again, another example of pragmatism that my colleague has not shown.
You know, I fundamentally think we've got to protect and preserve both Medicare and Social Security, and they will require some reforms to extend the solvency of those programs. And on Social Security, I do think for people below age 55, we're going to have to phase that up gradually to age 70. But I think we're going to have to look at making changes like that to protect and preserve these programs.
My opponent called Social Security a Ponzi scheme, even though it's helped millions of Americans retire with dignity for over 70 years. And he voted for the radical Paul Ryan Medicare destruction bill that would have told our seniors, you're alone, and make them pay $6,400 more a year. And he wanted to give those savings to big oil and to entities that don't need them. I'm going to work to make sure Medicare is solvent for decades to come.
We need to move on.
Gentlemen, with all the disagreements over the Affordable Care Act, the health care law, what do you think needs to happen to health care policy going forward? Mr. McCloskey, we'll start with you.
The parts of the Affordable Act I agree with are ending discrimination for pre-existing conditions, allowing 26-year-olds to be on mom and dad's policies, and closing the donut loophole so that we can afford prescription drugs. I also want to provide more tax incentives for small business owners so they can do the right thing and afford health care, which is what they want to do for their employees. Here in Colorado, we've taken a pragmatic approach. We've created health care exchanges, we've worked with the hospitals on hospital Medicare fees, and we were the first state in the country to remove fee-for-service and replace it with patient outcomes. For the Medicare dollars we receive, from the federal government to the state of Colorado. These can hold down costs.
Mr. Kaufman.
You know, I don't think any changes to health care ought to take money out of the Medicare system. And so the proposal that my opponent supports is that we're going to lower reimbursement rates to doctors and hospitals, that we're going to phase out Medicare Advantage, and we're going to take those savings and we're going to put them into the new health care program. And I fundamentally disagree. I think any savings out of the Medicare system have to stay in the Medicare system, and I think that's just very important.
You want to repeal Obamacare, though?
Absolutely repeal it, and I think we can do better. I think it's punitive on the Medicare system, and I think it's punitive on small business.
Are there portions that should be modified, Mr. McCloskey?
Definitely the small business tax incentive piece. But Mike's wrong, everything he just said about the issue of Medicare. He wants to cut Medicare benefits and make our seniors pay $6,400 more a year so he can help his insurance company benefactors. That is not a policy. I will defend Medicare, and in the spirit of Ronald Reagan and the Democratic Congress, work to make it solvent for decades to come in a bipartisan manner.
That's an inaccurate description of what the plan I support does. First of all, it leaves people age 55 and older in the current system, and it takes people under 55 and it creates pre-approved options for them to choose. The second lowest price option, it becomes a benchmark, and above that, people will pay the difference. And so if they choose the benchmark, there's no cost. And I think this choice and competition is a way to bend the cost curve for Medicare recipients, not the kind of rationing through the Independent Payment Advisory Board that my opponent supports.
I got to stop as we got to get a couple
he seems not to care about people under the age of 55. I do, and I'm going to honor that commitment we made to them.
We're moving on to the lightning round here, and the first question is, have either of you ever been arrested?
No.
No.
Regardless of other reforms, do you support the DREAM Act that would legalize the status of some people who would come to the U.S. as children? Mr. McCloskey first.
Yes, because these kids aren't going anywhere. I want them to contribute to our society.
You got to do comprehensive immigration reform, not in little bits and pieces.
All right. Do you support the federal legalization of marijuana, Mr. Kaufman?
No.
No, I want federal and state laws to align.
Do you support the president's change of heart this year that gay marriage should be legal?
Yes, I think God makes us all who we are, and we all deserve the same opportunities.
Decided at the state level.
On the whole, did President Obama's 2009 stimulus measure work?
Yes, and for example, there's a company in my district that hired 11 people as a result, and it helped us avoid a fiscal cliff.
Absolutely not. Stimulated the size of government and not the private sector.
Do you support an extension of the Bush tax cuts for some people, or for all people, or not at all? Mr. Kaufman.
Prefer all, but reality is we'll have to negotiate.
All right. And
for the most affluent, so everyone can pay their fair share.
should the Dodd-Frank law meant to reform Wall Street practices be repealed?
No, it needs to be amended so that more access to loans to small business owners can occur.
It's fundamentally flawed in that it institutionalizes too big to fail, and what we need is I think we need to break up the big banks in terms of their commercial and their investment banking practices.
All right.
Big question. Who's your favorite Denver Bronco? Mr. McCloskey.
Well, of course, Peyton Manning.
Mr. Kaufman.
Peyton Manning.
Look at that. Agreement on something.
All right.
Before the debate, we flipped a coin to determine who would give closing arguments here. Joe, you won the coin toss and chose to go last, so Congressman Kaufman will begin with you. You have 1 minute.
Thank you. When I came home back to Colorado from the Marine Corps in 1983, I started a small business that grew to 20 employees. In small business, I learned how to balance a budget, how to meet a payroll, and how to create jobs. And I've taken that experience to Washington, D.C., and I want to continue fighting for policies that benefit small business so they can expand and create jobs. I've served this country in both the Army and the Marine Corps, and I'm a combat veteran. And I've broken with my party over the issue of defense spending. I believe that we can reduce defense spending without compromising the national security of this country if we do it properly. And I fundamentally believe that we have to reform Washington, D.C., the culture of Washington, D.C. And so I've been fighting for a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution to strip the power away from Washington, from Congress, to spend money that we don't have, to end the congressional pension system, and for mandatory term limits for every member of Congress. And I would deeply appreciate your vote on November 6th.
All right. Closing, Joe McCloskey?
I almost became a minister when I was a young man, but chose public service instead because of my deep commitment and belief in public service and serving others. I was raised in a middle-class household. My dad was a teacher. My mom was a waitress. And I was taught if you work hard and you play by the rules, your unique version of the American dream can come true. I still believe in that. I'm running for Congress because I want to reignite the American dream. I want to restore job growth. I want to restore economic growth. Sadly, the American dream is under attack by right-wing extremists like my Tea Party opponent, Mike Coffman. While I'm focusing on Buy American legislation and renewable energy job growth to create good-paying private sector jobs here at home, he's continuing tax incentives to corporations that ships jobs overseas and tax cuts to big oil who don't need it. I will protect women's freedoms. He supports the radical personhood amendment that would criminalize birth control and outlaw many forms of abortion, even for victims of rape or incest. And finally, I'll work to make sure Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid are solvent for decades to come. He called it a Ponzi scheme and wants to privatize it. Stand with me on November 6th, and I'll stand with you as a servant leader.
All right, that's all the time we have. Joe McCloskey, Mike Coffman, thank you both for being here. And on behalf of Curtis Lee of the Denver Post, I'm Brandon Ritteman. Thank you for joining us.